Hello, I'm Laura Helmer, President of the League of Women Voters Minnesota and a member of the League of Women Voters Eastern Carver County. I am not a voter in this district. I would like to welcome all of you tonight, the candidates, the audience, and those viewing at a later time, to this forum sponsored by the League of Women Voters Rochester. We'd also like to thank our generous partners of tonight's forum, the Rochester Post-Bulletin, the Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce, and the Rochester Public Library for their help. The League of Women Voters is a volunteer organization. We are organized at the local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to participate in government. While we as a league do study and take stands on issues, we never endorse or oppose political parties or candidates. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters Rochester or any partner or sponsor of this forum. And the sponsorship of the forum is not an endorsement of any candidate. It is our purpose in sponsoring this forum to provide you with an opportunity to hear candidates discuss face-to-face issues that are important to you. Tonight's questions have come from LWV Rochester, the Post-Bulletin, the Chamber of Commerce, and members of our audience. You are welcome to submit as many written questions for the candidates as you like. Just hold up the cards as you finish them, and a league volunteer will collect them throughout the forum. If you are watching the live stream, you may email questions to lwvrochester@lwvmn.org. Tonight's volunteers who are managing the questions are also league volunteers. Questions that are unclear, hostile, or of a personal nature will not be used. Given our format, your questions must relate to all candidates. Questions that fall in the same general area or which have been addressed in opening statements may be consolidated to allow the moderators to cover as many topics as possible in the time allotted. We appreciate questions that are forward-looking rather than a review of past issues. And if the answer was unclear to you, feel free to submit a follow-up question or to ask the candidate after the forum. Cards become the property of the League of Women Voters Rochester. As there is never enough time to cover all the issues in a limited time and setting such as this, please feel free to contact the candidate's campaign headquarters directly if your questions are not addressed tonight. We'd like to thank all candidates for running for office, for offering to serve their community, and for the enormous time, dedication, and commitment that running and serving demand. We encourage our members as individuals, as we encourage each of you to get involved in your community and the political party of your choice. Welcome to tonight's forum, which features the candidates for Olmsted County Attorney. Candidates for this seat are Karen MacLaughlin and Mark Ostrem. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to offer an opening statement. The candidates will then respond in turn to questions provided by LWV Rochester, this evening's partners, and by the audience. Candidates will have 75 seconds to answer each. The candidates will then have 2 minutes each to make a closing statement. So I suggest, candidates, that you make your answers as succinct as possible. It isn't necessary to use the entire time for your answer, but please finish your sentence when your time is up. We would like to cover as many questions as possible. Each candidate also has 3 30-second rebuttal cards. These can be used at any point after each candidate has answered the question. Only 1 rebuttal card may be used per question, and please put the card in the basket after you have used it. I would like to remind the audience to remain quiet during the forum, hold your applause until the end of the forum, and turn off all the your electronic devices. Timekeepers for tonight are LWV Rochester members Julie Gillickson and Cassidy Ellman. Questions will be coordinated by LWV Rochester members Anna Furling and Mary Jones. Asking the questions will be me and Mark Wasson from the Post-Bulletin and Ryan Parsons from the Chamber of Commerce. Candidate Mark Ostrem will begin with their opening statement. And again, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mark Ostrem. I'm the Olmsted County Attorney. Thank you to the League of Women's Voters, the Post Bulletin, and the Rochester Chamber for hosting this event tonight. I've been the Olmsted County Attorney for 16 years. I'm here seeking your support to continue my work as your County Attorney. During my term, we've seen significant evolution in public safety issues. When I started, we didn't have a drug court, a veterans court. We weren't working closely with schools to support truancy efforts. We didn't have a pretrial services team. Like it did for all of society, the COVID pandemic virtually closed the judicial system for a few months, and it minimally functioned for a very long time. Even today, it's not back to full strength and certainly lacks the rhythm to be efficient. I've been working closely with our justice partners to get us back on track. The murder of George Floyd prioritized how justice partners process cases, giving consideration for persons, not just events, in the reports. In Olmsted County, as a member of the Justice Council, we've engaged in thoughtful discussions to make lasting change, balancing fairness and equity. The pandemic and social discord over the murder also brought about serious public safety issues. Gun violence and serious disrespect for leadership at all levels are causing us to feel less safe. Those are two of my priority issues. I've been working closely with law enforcement, city and federal prosecutors, corrections agents regarding gun violence. Minnesota statutes have mandatory penalties for gun violence. I will enforce those. Minnesota also has a thorough and thoughtful process for gun permits, handgun permits. Persons caught unlawfully possessing guns will also face vigorous charges. I've accomplished much during my term as your county attorney, but I've just outlined I have more to do. I look for your support and vote on November 8th to continue as your county attorney.
Karen MacLaughlin.
Good evening. My name is Karen MacLaughlin, and I want to be your next Olmsted County Attorney. I proudly served as an assistant Olmsted County Attorney for 16 years, and I prosecuted very serious cases for that office, and actually prosecuted hundreds of cases. But the serious cases included things like sexual assault of teens and children and criminal vehicular homicide. I have almost 20 years of trial experience, and I now work for a legal aid office where I represent low-income people who can't afford the costs of a private attorney. In 2020, I was elected to the Rochester School Board. Along with my other school board members, we guide the district, include such complexities as the pandemic and hiring a new superintendent. I was proud to make the recent motion to remove the interim title from Dr. Pakel's role. While on the Rochester School Board, I led the board's collaboration with the Rochester Police Department to modernize the school resource officer contract. I support the district's equity policy and initiatives. I also helped the board develop its response to recent school shootings, teen suicides, and related gun violence. We passed a resolution in August to provide safe gun storage information to all district families. As your next Olmsted County Attorney, I will leverage my experience and leadership to support safe communities for everyone, including people who often mistrust the justice system. The world has changed since the last election for this office, and I believe the county attorney has the ability to set and influence policy and exercise charging discretion to be in the best position to change policy here in Olmsted County, and I look forward to tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. And something I didn't note in the opening remarks is that the timers will hold up signs for you when you have 30 seconds left and 15 seconds left, and finally a stop sign when the time runs out. I'm sure you noticed that during your first remarks. Now we'll begin with questions, and the first question will go to Karen MacLaughlin. Do you believe that there are priorities in criminal prosecution, and if so, which would you prioritize? And you have 75 seconds.
Yes, I do believe that there are priorities in criminal prosecution. Throughout my career, I prioritized crimes that involve victimization of people. They're known as people crimes in the county attorney's office. I always put the most time and effort into those cases. They include things like assault, robbery, sexual assault, and serious cases like that. I would also prioritize reducing gun violence in our community as county attorney.
Mark Ostrem.
Thank you. You know, Karen and I don't disagree on that particular issue. Person crimes obviously need to come first, and then those most violent cases also would come next, often are also person crimes. Gun violence and those other cases that affect the overall impact of public safety, the overall amount of or safety sense that our community has, also have to have significant priority in our community and in our office. And then those that have other statewide type implications. The work that we do is far more than just criminal prosecution, though, and so we also place significant importance on those cases that involve child and adult protection issues and mental health issues. Thank you.
I do have a rebuttal.
Go ahead.
I'm glad we're able to talk about gun violence prevention, and I want to touch on this here just in case we don't get another opportunity. I recognize that Mr. Ostrom does talk about reducing gun violence, but I do not believe, and that evidence does not show, that his office is serious about that. There are reports to show that are submitted to the state that in 2020 into 2021, his office dismissed 86% of the cases that were charged and waived
Stop the timer while we're figuring this out.
Okay. We should be ready to roll. Sorry for the interruption.
and waive the mandatory minimum on the one case that did go through court. In 2021 to 2022, there was a slight increase in the charges, but the prosecutor waived the mandatory minimum sentence in 80% of the charge cases.
Mark, do you choose to use a rebuttal at this point? All right, thank you. Mark, the next question will come to you, and Mark, would you like to ask it, please?
Yes. Would you pursue charges against somebody for violating a Minnesota statute that you are morally or ethically opposed to, and can you explain your reasoning?
So that's a tough question, because I take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of Minnesota, and that means I take an oath to uphold the laws. I do have some level of discretion, and I use that discretion in various ways. Sometimes there are particular charges or events that I think that there is a better way to resolve the issue. Sometimes there are events that occur that, frankly, I've never come upon a case yet that's come to us where I morally oppose the law. So it's never come to me yet, but there are ways to resolve those cases through diversion or other non-court functions. But I hold my oath pretty strong, and I take that oath to uphold the Constitution. So I can't say that I would not charge.
I would take the same oath that Mr. Ostrem is talking about, but I would take a little bit of a different approach to this question. In terms of something that a prosecutor is morally or ethically opposed to, the example I would give currently is that sodomy is still a crime in Minnesota. There's a statute that prohibits sodomy. I'm morally and ethically opposed to that statute because I think it's extremely outdated and does not represent our community and our LGBT community and others. Where I see this question going, though, is the question of whether I would prosecute someone for an abortion if the law was changed in Minnesota or federally and abortion became illegal in Minnesota. I would absolutely not prosecute someone for an abortion or providing abortion or assisting with abortion if abortion becomes illegal in Minnesota. I've been very clear about this position since the Dobbs decision came out in June, and I think it's striking that this is the most important decision in Mr. Ostrem and mine's career, and he has said nothing about it. I believe that abortion is health care. I support safe communities, and I include protecting every human's right to a safe abortion as safe community. I'm committed to protecting reproductive freedom for anyone who needs that protection in Olmsted County.
Thank you. Are there any rebuttals? Go ahead, candidate Ostrem.
Thank you. You know, I guess I knew abortion would probably come up sometime tonight. Abortion in the state of Minnesota is not illegal. It's been protected by the Constitution. The Minnesota Supreme Court has upheld that. It's not an issue. It's not like other states where there is some deeply hidden law that is now being resurrected because of the Dobbs decision. So I don't like to get into speculation. I don't think it's appropriate to speculate about things like abortion coming to this office. It just is not going to happen, certainly not in this next term.
Go ahead, candidate MacLaughlin.
I believe that the idea of speculation probably was true for a period of time. I do not believe speculation continues to be true now that the Dobbs decision has come out. The Dobbs decision not only talks about abortion and overruling Roe versus Wade, which was very well settled law in our country until that decision came out. I think Justice Thomas also takes a lot of that further and raises all kinds of concerns about our freedoms in our country, that it's no longer speculation.
Moving on to the next question, it will come to Karen MacLaughlin first. And Ryan, can you ask that, please?
Yes. Good evening, candidates. Public safety is a priority for both Olmsted County employers and residents. This includes, on the employer side, for their staff and their customers. As county attorney, how will you work to encourage public safety in businesses, their establishments, and their neighborhoods?
I think I would let me start over. I would do exactly what I did when I was a prosecutor in the Olmsted County Attorney's Office. I took crime seriously in terms of whether it was a business that was victimized or a person. I believe that all cases should be treated seriously when and I don't differentiate between people or businesses, and I would also engage with those business leaders when elected so that they can be assured that that is my position in terms of crime that affects their businesses.
Candidate Ostrem.
Thank you. We've had a lot of change in our downtown area, particularly over the course of my term. We've had a lot of businesses move in, we've had a lot of businesses move out, and I know a significant part of that angst has been the level of activity, particularly after 9 or 10 o'clock at night downtown. I've worked very closely with Rochester Police Department in particular, with the CERT team that's down there. We've talked about different ways to prosecute various crimes that come through. We treat the businesses as a victim. We work very closely with them. I've tried to work very closely with the chamber, trying to attend the meetings as often as I can, those monthly meetings. It's very important that we all feel safe, no matter where we're at in this community, and that includes them to be able to walk downtown and feel safe when you're walking downtown. I know I've worked very closely again with Rochester Police Department. I know they've got various teams that patrol the area downtown. I've spoken with them. I know what their process is and how they work well with the community members that are down there to try and engage with them and communicate with them and try and just, with their presence, kind of help tamp down that type of activity.
All right, moving on to the next question, and that will go to Mark Ostrem first. And we've had many questions come from the audience in this category tonight. What do you feel needs to be the position of the county attorney regarding sexual assault? How would you implement this position? And would you intervene with law enforcement to ensure that you receive all valid rape cases?
We actually have a policy in the office that all sexual assault cases are to be brought or to be sent up to our office. We don't, and this goes back to a Star and Tribune series that occurred, that was put out a number of years ago. all sexual assault cases are supposed to be referred up to our office for us to review. So I don't want law enforcement to be taking an interview and making a decision. That's our decision to make. We need to make that judgment call. Sometimes it includes having additional information. Sometimes it includes doing some more research, things like that. Those are really, really difficult cases, and we do everything we can to prosecute every viable case that we can. We're not afraid to try those cases, and as we look at the cases that we take to court and the cases that we sometimes lose, it's sometimes those very difficult sexual assault cases because we're not going to give up on a victim. So my policy has always been with law enforcement that they're to send those cases up to us. They're not to put them on a shelf. They're not to put them in a drawer. Those are cases that are more appropriate for us to review and us to make the decision as a prosecutor, not the law enforcement officer.
Karen McLaughlin.
Cases of sexual assault are some of the most serious cases that a prosecutor in the Olmsted County Attorney's Office is responsible for prosecuting. I was one of those prosecutors who prosecuted many, many sexual assaults. As Mr. Ostrem was talking, I was thinking back to one of the trials that I had. It was a jury trial in front of jury of the peers, and it was a first-degree criminal sexual conduct that I was successfully prosecuting because it was not only a sexual assault, but also a head injury. And I was successful doing that. I take it very seriously and would continue to do so. So I would implement a policy to assign the most experienced and senior attorneys to that role. I don't disagree with Mr. Ostrom that a policy has been in place for years to intervene or to have law enforcement send those cases to the office. My question is I would enhance that policy to also monitor the compliance with that policy and make sure that there's collaboration so that officers and the county attorney's office and county attorney are on board with implementing that policy to best serve sexual assault victims in our community.
Thank you. The next question goes to Karen McLaughlin first. This is from tonight's audience. What do you think is the most effective way to deal with low-level drug offenders? Do you support creating an option to charge low-level drug possessions as a misdemeanor rather than a felony? Why or why not?
I believe the most effective way to deal with low-level drug offenders is to be creative with the charging process and the prosecutorial discretion. I think our justice system has changed to a large degree when particularly marijuana is now legal in many states, that I think the view of marijuana today is very different from 5 or 10 years ago. So yes, I would very much consider a policy and would very much favor a policy of charging low-level drug offenses, particularly first-time offenders, with misdemeanors rather than felonies. And my reason for doing that is that I think it helps people. Let me start there. Having a policy like that would benefit people in our community who otherwise would suffer from very significant punishment type of consequences for behavior that is technically legal in other states, and it can cause them to lose their jobs, their housing, their education opportunities. I would want to be creative with that particular population of individuals and that particular level of drug offense, again, for first-time offenders, to make sure that the system is not as punishing as it has been in the past.
Mark Ostrom.
Thank you. In 2016, I was the president of the Minnesota County Attorney Association, and at that time we undertook a huge effort to change the statutory framework for drug offenses. One of the most important things we did is we made first-time offenses of small amounts of some drugs, not heroin, not meth, but some meth, made those a gross misdemeanor, not a felony. So we made that change back in 2016. We also have a statutory framework in place where a first-time offense like that, if they're successful on probation, the case is actually wiped away from their record. So we've done what we can to try and remove that barrier that people sometimes find following them from those low-level convictions. One of the more serious issues we have to deal with right now, though, is fentanyl. And we're working very hard to get the scheduling change for fentanyl and move it up into a Schedule 1. Because right now, somebody could be possessing what's considered a small amount of fentanyl, and that could be considered a gross misdemeanor. That's wrong. That's what kills people.
Any rebuttals? All right, moving on to the next question for Mark Ostrem first. Do you believe that giving the toughest possible sentence deters other possible offenders from committing that crime? Explain your answer.
It depends. The reason I say that is because I've got a real problem with domestic violence and DWIs right now, and I don't think our criminal justice system sends the appropriate message to our community that driving while intoxicated kills people, that harming your spouse or abusing your spouse is wrong. And we continue to see people cycle through the system doing that over and over. Does sending somebody on the most serious cases to prison deter crime? Not necessarily, because those people aren't out there looking, the people that are committing those crimes aren't watching what's happening to everybody else. Contrast that to what happens with DWIs. Everybody is out there in our community, and we all experience and see some of that. Domestic violence, we all understand that. If we could get a little bit more significant and tougher on those initial cases, those DWIs, we wouldn't have so many repeat offenders. We wouldn't lose so many citizens in those significant crashes. So that's where I think we need to send a better message, is on those types of chronic type crimes that are occurring in our communities.
Karen MacLaughlin.
As a young prosecutor, I likely believed that the toughest possible sentence deterred criminals. As an experienced prosecutor, I have doubts about that. I just don't know that in our society there's a mechanism to share that information broadly. I don't disagree with Mr. Ostrom that DUI and domestic violence are very serious crimes in our community. In terms of DUI, I'll just touch on that briefly. There is a process that if someone repeats the DUI, they can go to prison for a felony charge, as long as the prosecutor does not depart from that mandatory or a statutory sentence. In terms of domestic violence, I differ from Mr. Ostrom in the sense that he's had a domestic violence policy in his office for years. I think last time I looked at it, it was implemented in 2009. Because of that policy, many of the people do cycle through the system for repeat domestic violence offenses. And I don't necessarily, at the time I didn't disagree with why we were doing that. It was to move cases through the system and potentially give a second chance for those first-time offenders. But I think that that sets the stage for the court then continuing to cycle through those cases, and people are getting more than a second chance. They're perhaps getting a third or fourth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a rebuttal? Go ahead.
I just want to talk just for a second about my domestic violence policy. It was put in place in November of 2011. The purpose of the policy is to provide safety for victims using risk assessments, to also then provide that counseling and services for offenders so that they don't come back. And that's the goal of it. Is it successful? Not successful enough, obviously, because we have this continuing to come back. But the objective has always been to kind of stop that cycle, and that's why we put it in place.
Any other rebuttal? All right. Mark Wasson from the Post Bulletin will ask the next question to Karen MacLaughlin first.
To continue on, or to piggyback from a previous question, what's your stance on the further legalization of marijuana in Minnesota?
I would support the legislators that will make that decision for us in Minnesota. Like I indicated earlier, I think that our country is very different now that some communities have decided either by referendum or through their legislatures to legalize marijuana, that I think it's a trend that's crossing the country. I actually am a late comer to this issue because I spent a lot of my time in juvenile court seeing young people who started using marijuana very young, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. That very much concerned me, but I think that the regulatory framework that our state would put in place would make it very clear that recreational use of marijuana would be for adults and not for young people. And it would not have the impact that I was previously concerned about. And again, I think it's the trend that's just coming to our state.
Mark Ostrem.
Thank you. I do not support legalization of marijuana. I'll just get right out there and say it. Currently, Minnesota law says that possession of a personal amount of marijuana is not a crime. We don't charge anybody for possession of a personal amount of marijuana. But the gross amount beyond that is a crime. That's selling. First offenders of sale charges, we often plead those down to a possession charge to allow for that statutory dismissal that I talked about earlier. I was at the Minnesota Teen Challenge Gala the other night, and time after time, story after story, we heard somebody say, I started using marijuana when I was 12 years old. And they graduate up to the harder drugs, the meth, the cocaine, the heroin and fentanyl, and then they find themselves on death's door practically. People that are driving with marijuana in their system, we don't have the ability to measure it like we can alcohol. So we have a significant public safety issue there as well. I can't support the legalization, the further legalization of marijuana in the state of Minnesota.
Any rebuttals? The next question will be asked by Ryan Parsons from the Chamber of Commerce to Mark Ostrom first.
If elected, how would you evolve the operations and processes to best serve Olmsted County?
That is a loaded question. I've worked very closely with the Olmsted County Justice Council for, well, since its inception about 10 years ago. I've probably been on every subcommittee there is. So I feel like I'm deeply involved in every process and every system that is our criminal justice system, our judicial system. I'll continue to work very closely with those. A couple of the priorities right now certainly are the equity issues and diversity issues in our community. We've got serious problems with drug offenses right now, particularly fentanyl. We're seeing not just grams, but ounces and pounds of fentanyl coming into our community. Gun violence, as I said before, is a huge issue. Those are the issues that really are impacting and affecting our community today. Those are the issues that I've been working very closely with, particularly with the Olmsted County Justice Council, which is a subset of the county board, along with the city council and the judicial system. I'm going to continue my work doing that. Thank you.
Karen MacLaughlin.
I agree, we could probably talk for 10 minutes on this, so I'll try to be brief. In terms of evolving the operations or processes, one of the things that I would do differently compared to current practice is that I would mirror the goals of my office with the goals and strategic planning that Olmsted County is undertaking. I noticed in my research here that the county has goals for things like addressing inequities and racial disparities, addressing racism, and developing and enhancing supports for children of incarcerated parents. Mr. Ostrom gave a presentation to the board in July that doesn't address any of those issues specifically, and I would mirror my priorities with the Olmsted County Board because I think it's a way to collaborate together. I would also develop a data dashboard. I'm very pleased with how the school district did that for the pandemic to provide very detailed information in a visual way to make it very understandable. I think it's time that the police department do more of that, the sheriff's department, and the county attorney's office. I also have information on my website about some concerns that I have about the prior office culture in Mr. Ostrom's tenure, and I will leave it at that, but I would encourage people to vote. Encourage people to look at that if you're making your decision about who to vote for.
The next question will go to Karen MacLaughlin first, and it comes from tonight's audience. As county attorney, what would you do to develop a respectful relationship with the immigrant community in Olmsted County?
I believe the work that I've done in the community has already established that respectful relationship. Several years ago, kind of where I started in community work was advocating for changes in our community as it relates to immigration. It was at the time where our former president was implementing a travel ban, and I actually engaged with the community and advocated for changing our policies and meeting with individuals to make sure that our immigrant population, when I talk about safe communities, I want the immigrant population to be included in safe communities. At the time, I was seeing a lot of activity in the community in terms of traffic stops, detention, arrest that were not safe for our immigrant communities, and it's very important to me. I think particularly in Rochester, we have such a large and vibrant and important immigrant community that I don't like to see anyone treated unfairly in that system. I would carry that forward in my role as Olmsted County Attorney and continue to expand on those same principles.
Mark Ostrem.
Thank you. Over the course of my career, I've worked a lot with the various communities in our community. What stands out most significantly a few years ago is we worked very, very closely with the Hispanic community. There was great concern in the with us that the Hispanic community was not reporting crime because of their fears around immigration and other detention issues. And we worked very closely, had lots and lots of meetings with them to kind of quell down that fear and help them understand what immigration is really all about and how we all respond that way. I worked very closely with members of the Somali community, in part to help learn from them what their community is like, but also to share our community and our culture and help them understand how we can work well together. The law enforcement agencies put on an event, it's been about 2 years ago, in fact, maybe 2.5, where we had sessions to actually educate members of the community, and it's largely the Somali community, about what our judicial system and law enforcement and public safety was all about. Those are the kinds of things I love to do, and that's what I would continue. Thank you.
The next question goes to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I was paying close attention to what Mr. Ostrom is talking about in terms of the Hispanic community, the Latino community. And if I am understanding the policy that he implemented, that I don't see any indication that it has been changed, he advocated and advised the Sheriff's Department to contact ICE when anyone who was a non-citizen was brought to the jail. There is information actually on his website that contradicts the legality and the strength of that policy, and it's not in favor of our immigrant community in any way.
Go ahead, Mark.
I feel like I need to correct that. I advise the sheriff to follow the law. The sheriff at the adult detention center, the first question they'll ask anybody when they're arrested is, what is your country of birth? If you say anything but the United States, and it doesn't matter what color skin you are when you're arrested, if you say anything but the United States, they are obliged to make every effort to allow them to call their consular. That's what they do. That's what I advise the sheriff to continue to do. Follow the law.
All right, we have time for one more question, and then we'll have your closing statements. And this comes from the viewers online tonight. Do you think that term limits should be applied to the position of county attorney? Please give the reasons for your answer. And this goes to Mark Ostrom first.
Well, I'm going to immediately say no, I don't think term limits in my position are appropriate. We're not legislators as county attorneys. It's actually a role we play. It's a job we do. It's a career. It takes a while to get into the really guts of what you do and understand the enormity of your role. Cycling people in and out after 1, 2, 3 terms makes for very ineffective offices. It leads to a lot of turmoil that ultimately spills out into the streets. I know a lot of the county attorneys in the state. Many of them have been in their roles in the 30s of years. It's amazing. We've got the McLeod County attorney about to retire after about 35 years. Those are the people that really lead this state in public safety. Those are the people that really lead this community in setting the policies and the direction for our complete judicial system. Limiting somebody to 1 or 2 terms in particular would significantly hamper public safety and would have dire effects, frankly, on the judicial system.
Karen MacLaughlin.
I would favor some level of term limits, and I'll give my reasons why. First of all, it's something that the legislature would need to decide, so it's not the person in the office making that decision. And when I think about this issue, I'm not thinking in terms of 1 term or 2 terms, but I would consider supporting something like 3 terms or 4 terms. I think it's important for our community and communicating with their legislatures what they think about that concept, but I think that particularly in this role, in the current feeling of our community, I think it makes sense to consider that because things are changing so quickly. I think it's important to have someone who has fresh ideas, and as long as they're qualified and have the desire to take on the role, I think it's important to consider some sort of term limit so that new ideas can get into this very important office in our community.
And now we will have your closing statements. And I believe you've got 2 minutes each for your closing statement. And we will begin with Mark Ostrem.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here tonight. One of the hardest things for me to do is to sit still when I talk. I like to pace the room. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share my plan for the future. I've worked for 16 years to fulfill my mission to promote justice and public safety, balancing the rights of individuals with the needs of society. 16 years ago, I made a commitment to change my career to public service. I'm not done. To successfully lead this office and community, the county attorney needs broad experience doing the job. I have that experience. Our community is asking to get back to the sense of safety and respect that we all enjoyed before the pandemic. I can get us there. As the Olmsted County Attorney, the foundation of my job is to protect public safety. I do that not only as the chief prosecutor, but as a community leader. I lead at the local, state, and national level. I bring those resources from state and national forums back to our office to help make my office stronger. I have personally litigated nearly every case type this office receives, including homicides, drug crimes, domestic assault, complex white-collar crimes, predatory offender commitments, and many civil matters. The pandemic and other social injustices have created a swinging pendulum in public safety responses across the judicial system. It's time to stop that swing and bring back consistent response to issues in our community. Ms. MacLaughlin touts her vast experience, but she hasn't been in front of a jury for at least 16 years, not during my term. Her broad experience is actually quite narrow. We have much to do to recover from the past couple of years. It's from my proven experience that you can count on a safe path back. I look for your support and vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Karen MacLaughlin.
First of all, I want to thank the league, the partners, and the sponsors, and the audience here in the room and watching online or watching later. Mr. Osterman and I have some similarities. We are both from Wisconsin, and we are both rabid Packer fans, from what I remember. But we are also quite different. I do want to clarify something he said, just to make sure that I clarify the facts here. The first jury trial that I had in Olmsted County, in my career even, was prior to his term. It was a criminal vehicular homicide case involving 2 victims. It was against one of the most experienced attorneys in town. He is incorrect that I have not had any jury trials while he was in office. I had several. The sexual assault case that I talked about was during his term. I had a robbery case that ended up with a guilty plea mid-trial. It was an aggravated robbery with a firearm. And finally, I had a jury trial in terms of a domestic violence case that I took on from one of my colleagues who needed to be out. And I want to be clear that I don't believe that, I mean, some people in the system believe that the jury trial is the end-all of trial experience. I handled hundreds and hundreds of trials and have that experience, and I would bring that to the decisions of this office. And I think that that's important because things happen in trial. You need to know the rules of evidence. You need to be able to understand what will happen in a court before you make a charging of a case. I have the experience, and what I'm describing there is the real experience. And I also have the real leadership. I would take the initiative to advocate for positive change in our community. As I indicated earlier, I believe that it's important to support safe communities for everyone, and I view that as all of the various roles in this community, in this office, and not just the prosecutors.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank each of the candidates for participating in tonight's forum. Thank you for your service to the community and for your willingness to participate in the democratic process by running for office. I would like to remind you that the views expressed in the forum tonight were those of the candidates, not those of League of Women Voters Rochester or any partner or sponsor of the forum. League of Women Voters posts complete, unedited recordings of these forums. Editing is authorized only for official media reporting. Excerpts or edited clips of candidate forums may not be used for partisan political purposes. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thanks to our partners, the Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce, the Rochester Post-Bulletin, and the Rochester Public Library. Election Day is November 8th, and early voting has already begun. If you have voted by absentee ballot and would like to change your ballot based on what you learned tonight, visit mnvotes.org for more information on that process and how to make that happen. If you have a question about your polling place, would like to see your sample ballot, or learn more about the candidates, visit vote411.org. To see this forum again or view other 2022 forums, access them from the LWV Rochester or the Rochester Public Library websites. The library and LWV Rochester post complete, unedited recordings of this forum. And again, editing is authorized only for official media reporting. Links to the LWV or Rochester Public Library recordings are, however, welcome. Again, please remember to vote by 8 p.m. on November 8th. Good night, everyone.